Yeah, here she is again, my little chickadee. Throughout the photo sessions in this course, I'm going to be using the flash in its manual mode, and that means I'll have complete control over how much power the flash will put out. You can almost think of it like a dimmer switch that you might have at home, except that instead of the light output changing smoothly like it does with a dimmer, the light output jumps up or down by whatever power setting you've chosen. You might start off at half power, then you might switch to quarter power, then to an eighth, then to a 16th, right down to 128th power. Every time you double or half the power, you are increasing or decreasing the light output by the equivalent of 1 aperture f-stop. I've talked about aperture controlling the flash exposure, therefore aperture and flash power are inextricably linked. They work hand in hand together. As you change one, you need to change the other to keep to the same exposure. Or if you have in mind to use one particular aperture, say f4, then you can simply increase or decrease the flash power to give you the correct exposure at f4. In the experiment in the aperture lecture, the aperture ended up at f8, but I may not want to shoot at f8, I might want to shoot at f2 in order to blur the background. So let's see how I can do that. I've removed the grey background so you can see how the brickwork gets less sharp as the aperture changes. Also, I'll move the flash slightly further away until I get a good exposure at f8, ISO 100, and the flash is on quarter power. So here's the first shot at a quarter power. Here's the first exposure shot at f8. Remember, I want to get down to f2, a much wider aperture. You can see from this chart the steps I need to take to get to f2. So now I'll open up the aperture by 1 stop to f5.6, but deliberately won't change the flash power. As you'd expect, the photo is now overexposed, so I'll reduce the flash power to an eighth. Here's that shot, and you can see it's the same exposure as in the original. Now I'll open up the aperture by 1 stop to f4 and reduce the flash power to a 16th. Again, I've got a good exposure. I'll jump now to f2, and to get the correct exposure I'll need to dial down the flash power to a 64th. Here's the shot. So what's the difference in the photos? Well, take a closer look at the brickwork. It's a lot sharper at f8 than at f2. In fact, that was the whole reason for this little experiment, to get the background out of focus. So you can see now how the flash power works in conjunction with the aperture and also the ISO. But I deliberately kept that at a constant 100 just to keep things simple. So I'll just use this chart to summarise. All of these settings are equivalent in terms of exposure. So even if I were to have started off using different settings, say f5.6 at a quarter power, that would provide the same exposure as f4 at an eighth power. That's all for the time being on flash exposure. The subject will obviously come up again during the actual photo sessions, but bye for now.